So hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in with the presentation and with our conference for these 3 days. I'm very grateful to be here. So my name is Hana. I'm a recent Birmingham City University graduate. And today I will be presenting a little snippet of my kind of master thesis that coincides with of today's conference, which is REinterpret, and I will be addressing contemporary practice within the kind of techniques of reinterpretation in order to address kind of silent gender boundaries. So the name of my presentation is The Influential Power of Voice, so the significance and the contribution of text-based art in contemporary women's practice. So this is just kind of at first the agenda of my presentation. I'll just do a brief introduction and then go through the questions of why women artists use language specifically and define the kind of power of language, then go through the questions of how they're using the language specifically in order to gain voice and reclaim it, and go through the kind of support elements of aesthetics and how aesthetics supports their voice to be heard, and just a brief conclusion. So my kind of presentation objectives for today would firstly be to provide you with a brief review regarding the role of language and its provocative power, and also related to women artists' use of it for their own practice. Then secondly, to clarify how differently language is used by women artists and eventually what effect it creates. And thirdly, through recontextualization and juxtaposition and of course reinterpretation, to address the impact of language on these silent gender borders and how differently women artists treat language and in what way. So firstly, just to introduce what I mean when I say text-based art. So the term is used to refer to the art practice predominantly based around language, so where the subject of art is language. So the images on the right are by Jenny Holzer and Barbara Kruger. And during the late 1970s and 1980s, text-based practice were emerging and becoming known for the development of this kind of text-based practice further, and through this kind of different approach from their male colleagues. And their kind of difference in approach is what I'm going to present to you today. Two relevant women artists that I refer to when I talk about this treatment of language and text art and text-based practice. So Barbara Kruger and Jenny Holzer can kind of be seen as the frontrunners in this new treatment of text-based art, because their work is so direct and it continually refers to topics outside of that you can see here. This image is by Barbara Kruger, and she usually explores topics of social and political issues, and she questions them, and her most notable work is centered around women's rights and anti-consumerism. Jenny Holzer also which you can see in the image here, she started her text-based work with truisms and inflammatory essays, where she would present information, statements, and sayings and cliches as big blocks of text. In this image, one example of it in Times Square in New York as part of, it looks like an advertisement. So her work is also deeply engaged with social issues and can pertain to a wider audience that's not even maybe concerned with art, but can still understand it and connect with it. Also, Guerrilla Girls, they are a female collective known for anonymous interventions and staged acts where they criticize particular issues on the intersections of politics and art. And they are usually very focused on political correctness, feminist issues based on very real facts, sexism and racism specifically in the art world. So these are just a few examples that I'm referring to when I talk about language and how it's treated by women and text-based practice. The topics that we can explore with their practice reach beyond art itself and the aesthetic qualities of language. They execute their voice in trivial matters such as politics, social injustice and responsibility, identity and feminism. And I believe that this is the reason that their work is so distinctive and very, very relevant in the present and connected to this use of language and its recontextualization or reinterpretation in order to gain a voice and go through these silent gender borders. Firstly, I also wanted to quickly highlight the kind of difference in the approach when using text, generalizing the male use of text, how male artists use text in their practice and women, which we'll see in the examples after. So male use of text is usually very indirect and reserved, while women's use, as seen in the previous examples, is very direct, assertive, critical, and actually very emotional. While also the male use of text, they use language in the context of art and its aesthetic properties, researching the boundaries of art, what it means, what art means, and how far can it go with language. So using language as this kind of exploration tool. While women use it to pertain to issues outside of art, social, political, feministic, basically using tool to exercise their voice and power. So this can be seen in these two examples here, three. The two images, artworks on the left are by two male artists, John Baldessari and Edward Richet. And the one on the right, where it says "You must act, the climate has changed," is by Jenny Holzer. And I think in these examples, you can really see the difference and how women's use of language in their text-based practice is very different and very direct and assertive. Now I want to move on to explaining why these women use the power of language, and to see how powerful language really is and what can it do to voice. And this connection with power is, I think it can be seen from two perspectives, feminist writing and generally language seen as a mechanism of power. So since the middle of the 20th century, text has been of a significant importance for female practice. Second wave feminism produced a generation of female theoreticians like Julia Kristeva, Kate Millett, and Hélène Sicot, I will be referring to here mostly because for Hélène, writing is an essential tool for women and a way to prove themselves as an equal with a valuable voice. So in her paper, The Laugh of the Medusa, she states, and this describes this necessity of writing for women and how it liberates them and gives them power. So she points out the importance of this kind of silence of voice. So it's this very good quote. It says, "It's by writing that women will confirm women in a place other than that which is reserved, symbolic, that is, in a other than silence. Women should break out of this near silence." So this notion of language and writing as a claiming voice, I think, is a vital account to connect with these women artists that are creating text-based art. This, in a way, confirms the appropriateness of text-based practice as a tool for the reclamation of women artists' voices. Secondly, to recognize language also as a mechanism of power is explored by French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu in his discussion "Language and Symbolic Power" from 1991. And he offers a very insightful view regarding this relationship between language, discourse, and power. He found that language is, of course, not only a method of communication, but also a mechanism. So when using language, symbolic power gained that a new meaning and a new effect. Provides a power and women who employ it through their practice, just as these women did. However, moving on to the how question of how these women language in their art is very important. And so the use of language by women artists, when you look at it, it's very specific, and it stems from a systemic discrimination of the language that is inherently male, which I will explain further now. So women artists employ language in a very strategic way in order to assert their voice. So to fully harness that power of language by exemplifying specific aspects of appropriation and juxtaposition, which I'll also refer to on later. But a seminal study in this area is a work by Robin Lakoff. And this study is very important because he recognizes here the linguistic elements that put women on the margins of power and voice. And he found that women experience linguistic discrimination in two ways. So in the way that they're taught to use language and the way that the general language treats them. So in his study, he identifies a certain manner of speaking and behaving is characterized as satisfactory. And he notes that, quote, if a little girl talks rough like a boy, she will normally be made fun of. So he points out that the more polite and subservient talk is appropriate for female children, but is it also a societal way of keeping girls in their place? So this kind of, I guess, women are denied. And on that note, he concludes that the ultimate discrepancy women are accessed on the grounds that they're not holding, demonstrated by behavior along the aspects of their behavior. We can conclude from this study that language is a powerful, but it might only favor the kind of characteristics of certain to be have a powerful voice that eventually creates impact and I guess changes beliefs. Therefore, these women, ACMC, language and text is very way and using language can also be noted tends to be used the act of taking in a new context. The indicates that in order to assert their voices. This voice is magnified in their own. So when this kind of opposition is language for use, the meaning and the value of something new requires these reinterpreted. And we start to utilize their typically way and shape juxtaposition can also be seen as similar to appropriation, having a similar effect. But this means that two different elements of use come together to, again, create a new value. So this would mean in this instance that women artists are using a masculine pattern of speech in order to gain a feminine voice. So reinterpreting a male voice in order for themselves to have a feminine voice. So this contrast is very powerful and impactful, and again, creates a new meaning and a new dynamic that allows for a new voice to break through. So this creates momentum that produces a new revolutionary narrative that women artists can build their voices on. However, another thing that, another element, I guess, that aids in this discussion of reinterpretation and reclamation of voice is their use of aesthetics and materiality. So besides the formal qualities on a basic visual level that we identify aesthetics of an artwork, in this way we can see it has a conceptual power, holds a certain conceptual power, and signifies a meaning that in a way outweighs that formal visual power. And this is confirmed by theoreticians Kress and van Leeuwen, who point out that for artists, the choice of a material is very suggestive. It means that the material also contributes to the meaning. It's part of a signifying process that actually allows women artists to employ their voices and power. And here I have two examples of that. So for example, Jenny Holzer, the work on the right side that you can see, she uses light mostly to sculpt her words in specific settings and space context, for example, sometimes on building facades. And usually the cultural implication of light is that it's used to enlighten a dark room, but it can also be used conceptually to see it as a medium that actually brings to light certain issues that are neglected. So with her light installation, she tries to address many social and political issues and kind of bring them to light. Also, another very important aspect is the choice of typography. And I found this in 3 different artists, and it has a special meaning. So artists such as Jenny Holzer, Barbara Kruger, and Guerrilla Girls using this typeface called Futura in their practice in order to take over its original use and create it for their own narrative and for their own voices. So this specific typeface, it's seen here on the left in its original form, Futura. It was designed at the beginning of the 20th century by a German designer, and it was in accordance with the time which it was created in the industrial age and the rise of design schools. It reflects those features. It was very heavily symmetrical with classical proportions. However, it had a large impact on the culture as it was used in advertising. And this was the kind of font that was used by advertising companies to target women in a very stereotypical form. So the way that these women artists use it sends a completely different message. They're borrowing and reclaiming and reinterpreting, actually, its commercial and stereotypical history of use. They're destabilizing its meaning and then using it for their own critical narrative. So this font is now used to address topics of social and political relevance and to actually empower the feministic storyline. So this destabilization of the typography's reinterpretation, I guess, is the parallel to that of language, which I previously discussed. And it kind of confirms the strategy of these artists. So the use of these strategies of reinterpretation and putting something old in a new context in order to gain a new voice allows an artist, and it provides a more pointed criticism, I guess, towards certain issues. So in order to kind of quickly conclude on all of this, I think this question, the quote from Adrienne Rich is very important. So she says, "Revision, the act of looking back, of seeing with fresh what we might imagine to be a highly eyes, of entering an old text from a new critical direction, is for women far more than a chapter in cultural history. It's actually an act of survival." So I think that this quote is very important to connect with everything because it highlights the strategy of both appropriation, juxtaposition, reinterpretation of all these elements like language and aesthetics, because the notion of revision that she describes here is connected to everything that I previously said, where an established element is used meaning, but it also highlights the notion of breaking from historical pattern of and seizing, hence shouting entry into new direction for women artists. And I think that anything that comes from these positions used by women artists easily connected to the conflict, which is interpretation pertaining on and gender borders, because these women is kind of break from pattern, seize the occasion to speak, assert their voice with these strategies. Take in order to their practice, the power of art and how it allows to be heard in various ways and to address the silent gender borders and any of the strategies used to inspire, I guess, share on culture and to share the boundaries of art and the of every. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you very much for your.
Thank you, Hannah. We've just had a few small connection issues. So you popped out just a couple of times, the clarity of that, but I think we could all see the information on the screen. But maybe if you do have any specific follow-up questions for Hannah, of course, pop them in the chat now, or use the contact that she's popped on there as well, just for anything that you might have that you wanted to chat to her more about. We've got a few minutes left for, so if there's any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we can ask Hannah about that too. Just check, Hannah, that you're with me still, just because I can't see you.
Oh, yeah.
Great. No worries. Fantastic. Yeah, I really, oh, maybe it worked now. I really enjoyed, I find it very interesting, the power of language and the power of voice, and how you were talking about the fact that these advertisements can actually have their own voice, and the women are using these as a way to say, you know, look, we can have our own power as well. I thought that was fascinating. I guess what kind of brought you to this topic of research? What was the kind of background for this?
I always knew that I wanted to, my master thesis, do research specifically on this, but I started to see what kind of question I wanted. I went back to language, that's really important to me, because I used to study English history as my BA, and that actually really very well to use this language for some way, because I think it speaks to me and I'm these two feel. So I went to researching and a lot of answers, I guess. What I want to do this is see the connection now, the new kind of event, digital technologies, and influence women's voices, and how women are using technologies, just as women before using kind of streamline the voice. How this kind of new age of social media and internet is also influencing voices.
Yeah. Fantastic. And how have you seen, I guess, personally through your research and historically looking back, a change in this voice? Do you feel that there has been a new power given?
I think something new is being created. I think something that I can't right now, because of flow of information. This very difficult, really impactful, and to see the occasion that these women could, because at the time we didn't have internet and not share their opinion. These women could advertising, I guess, speak as an institution, and then be. I don't know. I think the flow of information is very difficult to be really impactful and heard.
I completely agree. There's just yeah, absolute overflow of voices at the moment, especially I think in this very, very digital age. So that can be really difficult. But I think it's also very important to give that kind of subaltern, whether it be women, whether it be Indigenous peoples, the narratives that aren't often heard, a voice and a power. So it seems like your research is really focusing on that and sees the importance of that as well.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Thank you so much. Yeah, let me know if there's any other questions, or if Hannah, if you wanted to finalize with anything else about your research as well, or maybe where you're taking it. Do you plan on taking it any further with the next stage of your studies or your career?
Yeah, I would definitely love to do a PhD, maybe in this kind of, see how this impacts me now, to kind of I mean, it's relevant. To understand our society right now, of women, especially women artists, and how it's connected to language, and how language is I guess, changed right now in the digital space. So.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I hope you do take it further. It's nice to have already this solid base as well. I'll ask Andrea if she has anything to input there before we sign off and head over to the next session.
Thank you. No, it was very, very nice to hear more about your research and how indeed something so subtle as font can actually be so powerful in what it conveys to people and how our perception of language and what we see is. So, especially in this sort of female-focused issue. So, yeah, it's all very interesting, and it would be great for you to actually do more research in your PhD or in another context, and to let us know how it develops. But yeah, in the meantime, good luck with your studies and everything, and stick around, stay with us on the platform. There are a lot more sessions to come. Yeah, thank you again for participating in this conference, and I hope you had a good time.
Thank you.
Sorry, Hannah, if you have another minute, just because we do have a couple more minutes, we had a quick last minute question. So if you wanted to jump in and answer that from Andre, he obviously told you that he loved your presentation. He has a doubt about if language is something that is inherently in favor of men, how exactly can women flip this narrative in their favor? He's saying that we live in quite a complicated patriarchal society with somewhat established conservative values. So maybe you have something to say about that.
I think the strategies that these women artists are using. So I think the very important thing to kind of, I guess, reinterpret the strategies used and to subvert it to their own narrative in a positive way. I think, I guess the use that I mentioned is a really good example. That face Futura was used specifically to, I mean, there was a lot of advertisements where they target women very and putting them in a certain box and are setting it now they're using that typeface to actually speak for women to it. So I think appropriation and then juxtaposition are to, I guess, as he asked, flip the narrative in favor. But there's a lot more we can, I guess, still do and to better this.
Yeah, it seems like a very creative way to answer that problem. Yeah, Andre said thank you very much, and thank you, Andre, for your question. And again, thank you, Hannah, for your presentation today. Really, best of luck with the PhD and everything that follows.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.